Hi, and welcome to Decoding AQ, helping you to learn the tools, mindsets, and actions to thrive in an ever-changing world.
Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Decoding AQ. With me in my afternoon, in his morning, today I have Chris Voss. He is the world's #1 negotiation coach. He's a keynote speaker, best-selling author of Never Split the Difference, which has sold over 1 million copies. In fact, we met through Dan Sullivan at the Free Zone Frontier Summit a few years ago, and it was just very much a memorable moment in a great session that was led by Chris and Brandon, his son. He spent over 24 years in the FBI, with his final 4 as the Chief International Hostage and Kidnapping Negotiator. After working on more than 150 international hostage cases, he retired from the FBI in 2007 and founded the Black Swan Group just over 15 years ago. So a consultancy and trainer for both businesses and individuals on negotiation skills. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Ross, thank you. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me on.
I'm excited. There's a few things that have been floating around in my world because we share a couple of bits together, a nice WhatsApp group. And in 2019, Chris created and narrated the MasterClass, The Art of Negotiation. And I think it's one of MasterClass's top performing courses. And even now getting into the zeitgeist where comedians are mentioning you and commenting, which is pretty cool. Along with that, right, a regular commentator on lots of media from CNBC, CNN to Fox News, also featured in Forbes, New York Times, and lots of bits. And in fact, a good friend of ours in last year helped and produced a documentary film called Tactical Empathy, Nick Nanton, which was sharing your story. So I'd like to actually start, if I may, Chris, to maybe go back to 2007. You're retiring from this distinguished career at the FBI. Did you already have a plan for the Black Swan Group? And if so, tell me more about that, and maybe the first contract, the first deal, the first negotiation, the first consultancy, the first training piece. Just take us back to there, Chris.
Yeah, well, more of a direction, strategy, and idea than a plan. I can remember there's sort of a line in Star Trek at the end of the first movie when the navigator says to Captain Kirk, "Where do you want to go?" And he just he says, "That way." That was kind of what I did. Actually, that's kind of what I've done my whole life. So, yeah, I figured when I left the FBI that we would teach negotiation to companies, or, I don't know, I probably hold our own events. I didn't really think that much about it. I figured we'd be teaching companies, mostly because, I started teaching at business school and, it made sense. And I didn't think that we'd be coaching as much as we do. We coach a lot. And we really train entrepreneurs, Free Zone Frontier, Dan Sullivan's strategic coach, everybody that's in that are really successful entrepreneurs, and a very different mindset from entrepreneurs to corporate executives, massively different. And I didn't realize what a difference there would be in that entrepreneurs and entrepreneur thinkers would be hungrier for negotiation than corporate executives would be. It's kind of that simple. Bureaucrats, whether they're government bureaucrats or corporate bureaucrats, they're not as innovative as entrepreneurs are. So that's really the way it's evolved in a really sort of fun and interesting way, and ways that have surprised me a lot.
So that kind of insight and breakthrough, Chris, from at the beginning, okay, I'll go that way, something in and around training, educating, coaching of negotiation, maybe in corporates, to now where, is that your niche, do you feel, in entrepreneurs versus corporates, or is there still a balance between the two?
Well, we teach companies sort of cracking the algorithm to get through to a corporation is a completely different ball of wax. They tend to not really know what their values are. And if they know what they are, they got a set of official values that they don't live by. I think I read in a book, I want to say in the culture code, the writer of the Culture Code wrote the Talent Code and the Culture Code that I've recommended to everybody. And in the Culture Code, his name will occur to me, but I think he says only 6% of corporate executives actually know what their values are, which means if only 6% know what they are, they're sure not living them. So that's what makes them difficult to teach and train, because they're kind of all over the place as a general rule. And trying to pull Daniel Coyle and trying to pull Coyle's name, I actually forgot where I was going with that. So, it's my Alzheimer's kicking in, if I'm allowed to make that joke.
I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because we're all still human beings, but we operate slightly differently in different environments. If we're in a corporate environment, how do we as individuals, because a corporate's still made up of individuals collectively trying to do something, and yet the animal, as you said, is a completely different ball of wax versus an entrepreneur, still a human, but maybe behaves, the connection, the distance between the lived values, expected values, collective values is an interesting one. I wonder what your thoughts are around that. And to come back to, which one excites you more, Chris?
Entrepreneurs tend to excite me more because, the mission is much more important to them. Usually they have a very specific mission. The idea of making a dent in the universe by making a difference in a certain area. Corporations are driven by shareholder returns, and and they're driven by principally by making the quarterly goals. If you're a publicly held company, even if you're privately held, you probably got quarterly goals. Michael Mulgill, who's a brilliant guy, runs a large entrepreneurial organization out of Atlanta. They got daily goals. And, and I think then that gets you out of this quarterly mindset where you're driven by whether you're public or private, you're driven by the quarterly performance. You really ought to be on a daily performance. But they're driven very much on quarterly performances in companies and quarterly bonuses, especially if they're publicly held, and shareholder return, which overlays, a little bit different set of expectations on their performance. Like you can have you got a bad quarter in a privately held company, and a guy like me, if I'm an owner founder, I'm an 80% owner, and technically 100% when my son owns 20%. I'm like, okay, so it's seasonal, no big deal. I don't gotta face an angry mob of shareholders trying to explain, chill out, it's seasonal, or whatever it might be. So, you're driven by different dynamics in a corporation because of that, I think. And entrepreneurs, you got a bad year, but you believe in what you do. Okay, we'll adjust, we'll adapt, because we believe in what we do. And I know that sounds like I'm diminishing in corporations that they believe less in what they do. But, the leadership is driven by shareholder returns.
I think it's a real challenge, isn't it, for individuals within organizations, that connection to the impact they're having and their alignment to their own mission and purpose. And I think we're seeing an awakening of that in the workplace and society, of this connection to both an individual, but a collective purpose that matters to each given society, each given culture. And I think that's where we're getting a lot of the friction points, right? Is where there is that disconnect between the connection and where then becomes a choice. What is the choice? I might turn up, but no one's home, lights are on, but no one's home, or I actually then shift to go somewhere else. In an entrepreneur world, you do that, you feel it, you really feel it. In a corporate, then there's a little bit more shadows to hide. In terms of then the first deals that you really remember coming from FBI world, where, like I said, never split the difference, can't have half the hostage, to then dealing with an entrepreneur. How's that different, and what are the sort of insights that you've learned maybe in the latter part, dealing with a different animal of entrepreneur inside some of Strategic Coach, inside Free Zone Frontier, Dan Sullivan? What's the sort of different mindsets that exist there, Chris?
Well, I think the idea of splitting the difference or compromising, although very bad in practice, the spirit of it is positive. I think successful entrepreneurs tend to be much more positive. So they're going to want to create collaborative environments, and they're going to think, yeah, I should be fair. I mean, the F word, fair, really resonates with entrepreneurs. And so the spirit of compromise, the spirit of splitting the difference, is meant to be collaborative globally, but particularly among entrepreneurs. Now, the spirit versus the impact or the practice of it. I think a lot of people don't really realize how negative the impact is, especially when your intention is to be so positive. Let's work this out. Let's move on. Let's just meet in the middle and move on. I want to be collaborative with you. I'd like to split the difference with you. So that's a very positive mindset and intention versus impact. The impact is very negative. Splitting the difference is lose-lose, which creates a downward spiral. Compromise is lose-lose. I mean, if nothing else, particularly among the Free Zone Frontier people with Dan Sullivan, strategic coach, there's no preaching of compromise of the principles. So if compromising your principles is a bad idea, then how does compromising in a negotiation become a good idea? Or if you've been, if they say somebody's been compromised by the opposition, that's not a compliment. That's something's bad has happened to you. So to really get positive, upbeat, collaborative people to understand that your intention versus your impact are two vastly different things. And you should never split the difference, and you should not compromise. You should find a better outcome. You should take the extra time to uncover the black swans, the tiny little things that make all the difference in the world. Then both of you are far better off. It is the definition of win-win. The unfortunate problem with the phrase win-win is it's become a very effective tool of the person who wants to cut your throat, to get you to drop your guard. Hey, let's. I know for a fact if somebody says to me, hey, look, I want to do a win-win deal with you, if they tell me that in the first 5 minutes, I need to put my hands over my wallet. That's a problem. So I think entrepreneurs in the early stages are a little bit vulnerable to the idea of splitting the difference because they're so well-intentioned.
I think from my own experience, Chris, it is kind of two things. It's one, the intentionality, the positivity, and the other part's naivety. All right. And just that desire to do something and thinking that it's good, and didn't know that there was an alternative way, another route, an area where even an appreciation for one's own value. Often I think that's a big challenge until we get to a certain point where we're just at peace, we're just comfortable with it. And then we're not trying to prove, we're not trying to, demonstrate, we're just doing, we're just acting. I want to talk a little bit more about tactical empathy, Chris, and that's something throughout the book, in the training program that, the session you ran, and the title of the documentary film. Share a little bit more. What is tactical empathy, and how does this help shift from a lose-lose or this hold your wallet win-win to finding the black swan?
Yeah, short answer, it's applied people smarts. Intentionally applied people smarts, really calibrated by the neuroscience data that has been pretty solid, backing up how humans are actually wired. And it's an acceptance of how humans are actually wired. One of our top coaching clients, guy is just brilliant. I mean, we'll throw out a new idea to him and he'll apply it so much more sophisticated because he's a brilliant entrepreneur himself. I'm in a conversation with him the other day, and he said, look, you got to accept the fact the prefrontal cortex is a myth. The executive part of the brain, the decision-making part of the brain. In point of fact, everybody is driven by the reptilian side of the brain, the amygdala, the caveman brain. And then he said, you got to release the drugstore in their brain. What's the drugstore? The neurochemicals. How are people actually wired? And tactical empathy is an acceptance of how human beings are actually wired. And then how do we use it to collaborate in better ways? the fact that if I get you to say no, you're going to feel safe and protected. So instead of getting you to say yes, like, have you got a few minutes to talk? I'll just switch to is now a bad time to talk. It'll have an instantaneous impact on how you feel in the moment. I've changed which drug in your brain I want to release. I would prefer that you feel safe and protected and that you don't think of me as a threat. If you feel safe and protected and you don't think of me as a threat, you're likely to be more collaborative. You're likely to actually be smarter in the moment. If I do everything I can do to preserve your positive frame of mind, there's a statistic out there that we quote all the time that says you're 31% smarter than you would be otherwise. If my goal is a long-term great collaboration with you, and it is, then I'm going to do everything I can get you to think with me in the moment. And that's the application of empathy. It's not, a lot of people say empathy is knowing where someone is coming from. Well, that's half of it. The other half of it is articulating where you think they're coming from so that you create what Bob Mnookin at Harvard would call an empathy loop. And that's where the great collaboration comes in. And so tactical empathy is the application, the articulation of neuroscience and your gut instinct. Like, people are typically afraid to articulate their gut instinct. If I think you're upset with me, I'm either scared to say it, or instead of articulating it, I'll deny it. Look, I don't want you to be upset with my proposal. The calibrated application of emotional intelligence, tactical empathy, is to say, I can see you are disappointed with my proposal. That 2mm shift makes all the difference in the world.
And it just shows how important language is. And language comes in a variety of ways, right, Chris? We have the actual words, the tonality, all of the different things at our disposal, some conscious and unconscious. And we try to figure out how can we get you into the protected space, get you into your best smarts of what those things are. And I remember something that came up, which was around labeling. And we operate in a world where psychometrics, labeling, putting people with, you're this set of letters, this set of colors, all of these things, and a world where we've seen historically, labeling can be a limiting thing, limiting belief, don't want labels, and we try to label people, versus your twist and flip on that of labeling what's going on or what's happening with carefully considered words. It sounds like, it seems like. Tell us a little bit more about your labeling techniques that are part of that tactical empathy in application.
Yeah, and you make a great distinction in your observation there, that we're not labeling people, we're labeling emotions and dynamics. And that's a really important distinction to remember, because when you label a person, you put them in a category. Where when you label a dynamic, you're triggering collaboration, you're labeling an emotion. And I've found a vast difference in the impact of a label, even saying like, what I think you mean is, or what I think your philosophy is, instead of it seems like your philosophy is, or it seems like you mean. Those two impacts on the brain are hugely different. I'm getting ready to have a conversation with Andrew Huberman in just a couple of weeks about exactly why that is. I have a feeling, a hypothesis, I know, but something about a label lands in the brain in a completely different way. Seems like you're disappointed in what I just said. Would be a label that would scare the hell out of most people. But it'd be a great thing to do in a moment, because you can read disappointment on someone. As you said, language comes across in not just words, but the tonality and even the body language. I can read disappointment on you, or I can read hesitation. And instead of denying it, if I label it, I sort of draw it out into the open, and create a collaborative environment, which you have the option to respond to or not. And consequently, since you have the option, you're much more likely to respond. If I say, what about what I just said disappointed you? The word what triggered a different thinking in your brain, a different response in your brain. It actually stops you from responding for a moment while you contemplate. And if I say, it seems like I disappointed you, I didn't do anything to stop you from responding. I sort of opened up the options, which is going to cause you to respond faster. There's some real subtle nuances there, and the labels are just the best tool to get people talking that we've ever run across.
And I found I did, Chris, last year, a course on the neuroscience of change. It was run by Coaches Rising, and it was like a 14-week program, and it had some really smart people in there. Amanda Blake from Stanford, all sorts of bits. And what was interesting, and it's kind of a link to this, was when we're in a fear state, we have a couple of options that happen. We either go into armament or we go into disengagement. And some of those words and language are a disarmament type of trigger to just flip a slightly different switch, to go into neutral before decision, to go into respond before react, within the way that we consider. And the other thing I wanted to talk about before we get into mirroring, it is around low risk practice stuck in my head. And your son Brandon shared that, example of when we're negotiating, when we're doing things, doing it at high stakes or low stakes to try and practice some of these things out, because we could get it wrong, right? We could, get a little bit of labeling wrong and not have the effect or the impact we're wanting to, while we're trying to figure out these new techniques, these new tactics, and understand them. So share a little bit more practically about what doing this in a low risk situation looks like and the value of doing that.
Yeah, well, it's like an athlete loosening up before a game. I mean, it's keeping your mental muscles warm, keeping loose, keeping limber. You don't want to go into a game having sat on the bench for hours or even rehearsed what you're going to do in the game. And so how do you do low risk practice? Label the affect, the look on somebody's face, how the circumstances might be impacting them, whether they're the grocery store clerk or the drugstore clerk or the guy in a TSA, the TSA guy. I mean, I'm labeling the TSA guys on a regular basis, and I don't even got to get it right. I mean, these guys, they're guys and gals, are pretty generic as what you can expect. They're they're taking a bit of a beating from people on a regular basis who are annoyed that they're there to protect them, of all things. And, I'll throw out on a regular basis, tough day. And, they'll respond to that. And I can remember maybe a year or so ago, I'm going through TSA. I haven't thrown a label on anybody. And the guy watching the bags come out of the x-ray machine, he just got kind of an indifferent look on his face. And, I go with my stock tough day, and he kind of gets this confused look on his face, as he's thinking about it. And so I read that and I said, just another day, huh? And he goes, yeah, just another day. So I'm just practicing. And as it turns out, 10 minutes later, I'm in a lounge taking a call of a very important negotiation that if I hadn't warmed up a few minutes earlier with the TSA guy, getting it wrong, by the way, and correcting it in the moment, I'd have been off my game when that phone call came in. And it was somebody I had to talk to. Normally I don't take calls under those circumstances because I like to focus. So you can label anybody. Your Lyft driver. You don't even got to be right. You get them talking, you get to practice. You never know when that moment's going to come up that you're actually in a real negotiation, because, you're in them constantly every day. So, Brandon has always recommended this, throw a label on whoever you happen to see and see what kind of reaction you get, and read that reaction.
I think it's really good point, and it brings me back to the differentiation between labeling the person and labeling the context, situation, the environment, the sense of emotion or impact that they're going through. And unless you want to punch on the face or something, if you're labeling the people and getting it wrong, might be not such low risk stakes in those sorts of situations. In terms of how it shaped your own career, this process of treating life like an endless negotiation, do you find that exhausting or do you find it fun, Chris?
I love it. I mean, and I think it has to do with where I'm coming from, because I believe in collaboration and long-term relationships of trust, period. And I like the idea of leaving somebody better than you found them. So it's an opportunity for me to enjoy what effectively is altruistic, a missionary's impact, while simultaneously making me a better communicator, a more effective negotiator, which is the mercenary. I do want to have a more effective life. I do want to have a more prosperous life, however one might define prosperity. And it's not just limited to finances at all, although finances are included. And it's not essential for the finances to be there. I mean, some monks are very happy with vows of poverty because it's so emotionally, spiritually fulfilling. So, I'm trying to roll, I'm greedy. I'm trying to roll all that stuff into my life.
Into the mix. And it's always contextual. I watched a TED talk this morning, and it was a guy had rolled together 2,000 obituaries into a language model to see some data and analytics, some insights from these obituaries. And what was coming out from these obituaries that were written, and they were not paid for, not sponsored obituaries by the person, it was an editorial piece. And out of these 2,000, he then split them between famous people and, in inverted commas, non-famous people. So, Prince, for example, would be in the famous category as the musician. So, John down the road, not so famous. And one of the interesting things that correlated in both of those were things around help and service. And I found that quite fascinating when you just talked then about, okay, what are we trying to do? What's our context? I want to be collaborative. I want to be these things. I want to be prosperous. Want to leave people better than I found them. That actually that negotiation, if it comes from the sense of help, of service, of support, for a collective without excluding me in that, then that's a positive place to be, right? And that potentially is a really good life, well lived in that world.
That's pretty cool. That sounds like it was who's the TED Talk by? That's fascinating.
I'll find it and I'll fire the link. It was, really, really interesting. There was lots of other bits, in the 18 minutes of it, but I just find it fascinating where we look in the corners of life to try and understand it, try and find meaning. And I certainly find in a lot of the work that we're doing, where we're helping both people and organizations through transitions, through transition periods, through a phase of creation and destruction, of saying goodbye to a past skill, goodbye to a past, way we served in value, and hello to a new one. And, we'll have programmers that we've been saying, we need programmers, we need everybody to understand that, 30 million of them, that maybe in 5 years' time we'll be saying goodbye, we don't need human programmers anymore, it'll be the next phase. So if we go through all these skill sets, I just find those transition points really interesting about what happens, even maybe in the self-negotiation, let alone the negotiation with people around us of, I used to be that person. I used to be an accountant. I'm an accountant. That's who I am, Chris. I'm an accountant. And now what am I next? So for organizations and for people that go through those transitions, I'm interested, just from a selfish perspective, how would you approach the transition of self and negotiation of self? And is it any different? Do you need an external muse, or can you do some of this work individually?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think as entrepreneurs, we're constantly after the transition. I mean, that's what excites us. I mean, I don't know a successful entrepreneur or anybody with an entrepreneur mindset that isn't constantly trying to learn, which is that transition. I think it's the negotiation is really, who do you surround yourself with, and who, what do you compromise? Because then when you're compromising, you're giving up pieces of yourself. Well, what are you afraid of? The fear that we have is an ongoing negotiation with everybody, or the overreaction to the negative, because we're wired to overreact to the negative. It was necessary for the cavemen who survived to overreact to the negative, because the negative encounters with stuff that would kill you. So you better not forget it. You better overreact. Positive stuff doesn't kill you. So we weren't wired for it to drill itself into our brain the same way that negativity does. What there's is, and potentially an African phrase, somebody who's been bitten by a snake is afraid of ropes. That's the overreaction. So deactivating our natural wiring, I think, is an ongoing negotiation. And entrepreneurs tend to have daily practices which make them happier, which is then to deactivate the negative wiring. That's probably the negotiation with yourself, and then who you surround yourself with.
I think it made me think, Chris, there about the continuum of experience, the ability to reflect and understand at the extremes, saber-toothed lion or cuddle from mum and dad, wherever it might be on that continuum. Whereas in the messy middle, in the maybes, I remember, it's not the yeses or nos that kill us, it's the maybes. The life in the middle, the bits where they're not really obvious as to what they are, the languishing part, can make up so much of our daily lives, so much of our daily experience and company experience, until it gets to a breaking point, to good or to bad. And maybe that ability to see, to understand, and where on the continuum those expand to for each individual is an interesting one. And I like your idea of this, just being playful in it, just trying it out, just doing some of those things in different environments, try different contexts on. And it reminds me when you're a kid, you play dress up, you try different things, you write on the wall, you write on paper, you do all of these things. Yet in work and in life, no, these are the boundaries, these are the rules, these are the ways we do things. And maybe that stifled some of our understanding of both innovation or creativity, or to live in a way where we can be playful, to create better than we found it. What's your kind of thoughts on some of that? I'm musing in my own mind. It's how I think, Chris, is I kind of talk as I think.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful. I would agree completely. I think that, there's a lot of stuff that stifles our creativity. We got to adult. What's adulting about? Being responsible, being serious. And, I got stuff I got to get done. I got to file my taxes, all the stuff that is involved with adulting, if you will, which absolutely stifles our creativity, our playfulness. Off the top of my head, the two most spectacular negotiation successes that I've had recently, relatively low stakes. I was astonished at the outcomes. Both times I was in a very playful mood. One of them was at 10:30 in the morning over a medical bill. I got like 80% off the bill. Might have been more, because I made the call 10:30 in the morning, and I thought, what the heck, let me. It was a bill I owed. I mean, without question, I owed the money, and I was getting ready to pay. But then I thought, I'm in a good mood. I had to be able to knock at least 10% off this baby if I call in and I'm not a jerk. 10% is a throwaway discount. So I'm calling in, and I'm playful with this young lady who's in collections. She's not even customer service. She's in collections. Ain't nobody been playful with her all day. And it was a sweet spot of the morning for both of us, because we're both in the same time zone. It's my opinion, about 10:30 in the morning is perfect time. You might be at your best. And I was shocked at the outcome. She laughed with me on the phone, and it was amazing. And the other one was, retrieving my lost suitcase in an airport. It was late in the day, but I had got home a day early, and I travel so much. Even though my suitcase was lost, I was in a great mood. I'm in my home airport. I'm getting ready to go home, sleep in my own bed. I'm happy as a clam just to be back in the right zip code. And so I go into, to go after my suitcase, and I'm playful with the lady. She did stuff for me, I am sure violated her work rules as to find my suitcase. Like, I was shocked. And because of the playful things that I said to her, just changed her mood. So playfulness is probably a superpower.
Yeah. And I wrote about it actually in my book, about how can we get into a state of playfulness when it's not low risk, not low stakes, not when I'm in my best bit, but when I'm in my worst, when it's high stakes, when the pressure's on. And I likened it to the Monkey King, in Kung Fu, that can still smile at impending death. And if in an organization, in a company, in your role, in whatever you're doing, you might perceive it as impending death because your amygdala's flared up. You see this thing, I've just had a really bad conversation, just lost this client, this just hasn't happened. It feels like everything's gone wrong, DEFCON level 11 to me contextually. Yet I might know the theory, and I've listened to Chris and, oh yeah, playful, I need to be playful. What are some of the switches we can do to reach that state of creativity, of playfulness at the most high pressure, moments when it perhaps counts the most?
Yeah, great question. As I'm going through it, it can't be a straight line. I think the first thing is relieve yourself from it being a straight line. So the first thing, to calm yourself down. What I do when I'm really upset, and which means the other person probably is too. I'll switch to the late night FM DJ voice, as much to calm myself down as to calm them down. I'm really trying to get them calmed down. And there's a fine line between that soothing voice and condescending. This is not the time to go condescending. That's just going to inflame and insult the other side. Condescending will calm you down. But there's an air of superiority there, which is just doesn't help the other side. It's going to make things worse. So then what's the next step after that? If I can get myself calm, I can become playful. In point of fact, most of these arguments are success problems. Like, I don't got any real problems. I don't have cancer. My child doesn't have cancer. My grandchild doesn't have cancer. By and large, and there are people that do, by and large, in the United States, wherever you wake up, you probably don't have to worry about making it to sunset. Now, there are certain isolated neighborhoods where that is a reality, but 99% of the US, you're living in a pretty good spot. Go to the south of the Philippines. You want a tough environment. Go to plenty of places in Africa. Plenty of places in China. You get real concerns about survivability for the day. So I don't have that. So if I get myself calm, I can say to myself, you know what? I'm lucky to be here. I'm actually lucky to be in this argument. Where I am in my life today, any argument that I have is as a result of success, which means there's a lot of luck involved. So the first step is to try to tamp down the negative emotions, which then gives you the opportunity to kick into the positive. I don't think you can go straight from negative straight to positive.
Yeah.
So then it's, what's the progression? What's the side step to go from negative to positive? There's an intervening step of tamping down the negative first.
It's interesting. It reminds me of two things. One, I interviewed a lady who advocated for adult tantrums. And what she talked about is, as kids, when we have a tantrum, what we're doing is dissipating cortisol, we're dissipating from the body all of the stress hormones that are going on. And as we've grown up as adults, we don't tend to do that. So it bottles up, and then it breaks. If we can actually have a physical reaction to dissipate some of that, for you, it might be going into a certain voice tone. For someone else, it might be just having a shake, just to dissipate before you can go into, rather than, as you say, a straight line. So it made me think of that. And then the other thing it reminded me of was, and I'm going to try and connect it again because it's just gone, but it was with Jason Pfeiffer. He's the chief editor of Entrepreneur magazine. And he mentioned something to me that I will connect, bit like you remembered earlier, the author, Daniel Coyle. It'll come to me in a minute, Chris, because it's just gone. I'll work on it in my subconscious. Tell me about the other image in your background there, the full fee agent. Is that your next book?
No, we put it out in November with Steve Shull, who has been a real estate coach in Los Angeles for a long time. Steve's an interesting cat, and he probably about 6, maybe 7 years ago reached out for Brandon and I out of the blue. And Brandon says, "Look, we got to talk to this guy, Steve, great guy," and was coaching real estate agents, with the grind it out approach. Just Steve made it to the NFL. Steve was actually a Super Bowl captain with the Miami Dolphins. So he understood coaching because he had great coaches, and he understood hard work. And he thought let's combine the two for real estate. And he stumbles over Never Split the Difference and changes his entire approach, as he says, from fact, logic, and reason to emotional intelligence. And so he reaches out, and we start coaching real estate agents together. He starts bringing me in once a month to discuss the techniques. And finally, after we're working together for a couple of years, we're like, people that are following us, real estate agents, are making more money, and they're happier than they've ever been, have more time on their hands than they've ever had. And so let's put out the book. And so last November, we put out the book, Full Fee Agent. And in my opinion, real estate agents at full fee are one of the world's great bargains, if they're any good. What do real estate agents got to do for you? They should never cut their fee. A finder's fee is 10% in many parts of the world. Well, a real estate agent is a finder. They're getting 6% at full fee. That's a bargain already. So, we put out the book, The Full Fee Agent, and we're helping residential real estate agents prosper and be happier.
I think that can apply to many people, right? It comes back to know your value. What is your value? And know your boundaries of those things as well. I got it. So Jason Pfeiffer, he shared a piece around his perception of advice. Lots of people, I want advice, I want training. And he said, often what they really need is perspective. And they just need a perspective shift versus advice. So a new way of looking at something. So you gave that example of, hey, everything is actually gravy because I'm not at risk of living till the end of today. So all things are better. So I've just had a new perspective shift. For full fee agents, what's the perspective shift they need to get into to realize some of that power, some of that strength, some of that opportunity? And so I wonder what your thoughts are on the combination of, is there a Venn diagram of perspective in relationship to negotiation?
Yeah, and I think you probably hit an intervening step again, just with that comment, because when people are looking for advice or seeking advice, or what they're really looking for is insight. A conversation. We've got there's a new social media app called Fireside. It's a subscription service, and it's an interactive podcast. And I interviewed Mark Cuban on that just last week. And he was talking about, what we're really looking for is insight. He's never looking for great ideas. As a matter of fact, he has an intense allergy to great ideas. He does, however, have a tremendous amount of respect for insight. So then how do you get insight? Perspective shift. If you can look at the same thing from another angle and see it differently, then you can probably gain an insight from that additional perspective shift, because that's what we're after. When people are asking for advice, they're really asking for insights that they can act on. And yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me, that in order to gain insight, you may need a perspective shift.
You may need a perspective, that cognitive flexibility, that mental flexibility to see multiple angles. As we come, there's two bits I want to cover before we close out. And one of them is a very real situation that I'm in. And I think many that are listening to this will have either had or will have in the future similar situations. And the situation is, Chris, we've got a project we really want to do, and we've got a key player in that project that we want to work with. And the negotiation is happening, right? It's started. And to put this into a real context, we also did a mini documentary film with Nick 3 years ago, 2020. And we've been discussing, we need to do episode 2. One of the challenges and missing capabilities that we've wanted is distribution. We want a very specific distribution for it. And we've got one of the big 4 involved, because they would be a really interesting collaborative partner to be involved in this. We've got an in-principle green light from a connection. One, WhatsApp and an email, they got it, they understood, yeah, get involved. And now it's into some others who are around, okay, so what is this? And what is it about? What does it mean? And all those things. And we've got a conversation at the end of the week. And so this challenge, whilst in that real context, we're a startup, we're a small company, we've been going 5 years, and then you've got this monster, in my perception, right, of this huge organization that we're trying to do something at the global level of a mini film project. And I've got the jitters about it, from the green light in principle, the relationships I've got, feeling all great about it, to now, it's starting to get serious, and maybe we might not get it over the line. We might not win. Do I need to compromise? Where do I need to go? What's the sort of practices that, other than labeling, those sorts of things, in that sort of situation, can one think about when they're going into an opportunity that they really want, and that they feel potentially unable to sort of see the balance in it at certain points in their own stories, in their minds? What can they go through, Chris, in that situation?
Yeah, well, I think discovery, which is a strong repetitive use of what and how questions, because they're very deferential. They tend to land well with the other side. They give you good diagnosis. They make you think a lot also. So the more you utilize what and how questions to trigger collaborative, deep thinking in the moment with the other side, and then be prepared to label the answers. But especially in the situation you're talking about, the entertainment industry is fraught with exploitation and short-term relationships, which, it kind of astonishes me what a bad practice that is, and consequently how prevalent it is. Like, I'm studying some of the top guys in the entertainment industry now, and they don't engage in these practices.
Yeah, it's powerful when it switches, when it's long-term. I just watched the Arnold 3-parter documentary, and I didn't realize James Cameron was 29 when he did Terminator, and they've had this long relationship of time. And when you find the rhythm, when you find the flow, and you can build long relationships, you can do some cool work. You can do some great stuff together. And that's what I'm looking for, because I can see lots of opportunity, of impact, of research, of papers, of all sorts of different things. But it's got to start with, you've got to be in the tent. You've got to be on the field to start with, whatever that bit is. That's really valuable and very practical for people to use what and how questions, follow up what you hear the answers with, labeling those answers is brilliant. I'm conscious of our time, Chris, and this next and final piece is something I ask everybody at the end of the podcast, and it's related to the playfulness. It's related to experimentation to unlearning to all sorts of aspects of what we define as adaptability intelligence. And it's around doing things for the first time, Chris. And the question is, when was the last time you did something for the first time, and what was it?
Actually, I drove dune buggies in the desert last week, and I had never done that. And I had no idea what it was going to be like. I had a friend of mine from United Arab Emirates in town and wanted to do something special. And we went out and drove dune buggies in the desert. And it was so much fun. It was so much more fun than I expected it to be. I'm actually giving serious consideration to doing it on a regular basis, because I turn almost everything into work. You know, if I'm gonna decide I want to go back to hitting golf balls, I'll go back. I'm sure I'll go back out on the driving range and spend hours and study it, and make it a task, turn it into work. And even if I enjoy it, it's still work. I mean, driving a dune buggies in the desert the other day was just ridiculous fun, and that was the first time I'd ever done that.
I love it. The idea of just doing new things or seeing the same thing with new eyes is incredibly powerful in our lives. Something that I try to live by as well, Chris, to endlessly learn, to adapt, to understand the situations and help others along their journey just a little bit along the way. I'll share loads of links in the podcast notes for your book, for various bits if people want to get in touch. Was there anything you would have loved for us to have covered that we haven't covered before we close out, Chris?
No, not really. I mean, I'd like to share a couple of ideas with people on how they could follow up if they want more.
Yeah, please do.
The biggest thing, the thing that I'm the most excited about these days is this fireside thing we're doing. Social media app. It's downloadable on the App Store. It's a subscription-based service, but it's right in the sweet spot in the middle. I mean, a lot of people, after they've read the book and they've taken a MasterClass, they want to come to our in-person training, but they're either not ready for it or for a variety of reasons. Financially, the in-person training is expensive. And this is 1 year subscription to this costs less than the in-person training. And it's really cool. And we're doing cool stuff on it. All of our trainers are on it. We're up once a week. Really excited about it. So if next steps after you've read the book and taken a MasterClass, Fireside's a great next step.
Fireside. We'll have to get the links off you, Chris. We'll add that in. I saw on social that you were having a conversation and interviewing Mark Cuban, and I've bookmarked it to go back. And that was on that platform, was it? On Fireside?
It was, yeah. It was on Fireside.
Fantastic. Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to hanging out next time I'm over, or we're in the same arena and venue together. You're doing really good work. We've got, as you said, it's the people you surround yourselves with and that you hang out that help your ambitions go from dreams into something real. So thank you for inspiring me and many others. And I look forward to, as I say, hanging out next time we get to be together.
Yeah, Ross, thanks for the conversation. A pleasure.
Do you have the level of adaptability to survive and thrive the rapid changes ahead? Has your resilience got more comeback than a yo-yo? Do you have the ability to unlearn in order to reskill, upskill and break through? Find out today and uncover your adaptability profile and score, your AQ. Visit AQai.io to gain your personalized report across 15 scientifically validated dimensions of adaptability. For a limited time, enter code PODCAST65 for a complimentary AQ-Me assessment. AQai, transforming the way people, teams, and organizations navigate change. Thank you for listening to this episode of Decoding AQ. Please make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast directory, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Please do leave a review and be sure to tune in next time for more insights from our amazing guests.